Hi there, and thank you for continuing to stick with us doing this soil health and native pollinator presentation. There's an incredible amount of crossover between how we take care of our soil and how we take care of our native pollinators. And healthy soil is not just for the veggie garden at school or at home, or even for commercial farms. Healthy soil is for our ecosystem, for a healthy ecosystem. And one of the ways that we restore the ecosystem that we live in is by adding native plants. In particular, with regard to supporting our native pollinators, native pollinator plants, the benefits of which are many, are varied. It helps with water infiltration. So when we plant natives in our native soil, we help filter pollution and provide shade across this. So again, maximizing soil coverage. We support erosion control. So we keep the soil where it is because the native plants have different root lengths and grab onto soil in different ways. As you can see from this graph on the left, the native plants in this document have varied and deeper and many more roots that are helping to hold on to that soil. So it helps with erosion control. The resilience of our ecosystem is dependent on our native plants. So they're adapted to our climate. They are much more capable of handling the pests and disease that can be spread by ornamental plants that are not native to this area. So you might call them invasive. And finally, wildlife. Habitat is created when we plant native plants. The native plants were here before we moved in and removed them and put in different trees and plants. So restoring our native ecosystems helps our wildlife that was here as well. So next slide, please. So I am sure that you have heard about issues that are facing pollinators. There's been a lot in the news about the honeybee being in trouble, and even more recently about the monarch butterfly, the population of which has decreased by 99.9% here in the West, which is just an extraordinary figure. We have identified at least 5 things that are affecting pollinators. Habitat loss is considered to be the main driver of pollinator loss. And it can sound a bit ambiguous or vague, but we've lost about 150 million acres in this country to urbanization over the last 100 years. And to give you some scope for that, Oregon is 63 million acres in size. So we've lost more than 2 states of Oregon just to urbanization in the past 100 years. So that has had a profound effect on insects in our country. But even worldwide, insects are on the decline by about 40%. So habitat loss is considered one of our greatest challenges when it comes to pollinators. Obviously, pesticide use is targeted insect removal. So any pesticide and even herbicides we're discovering now are challenging the pollinator's ability to survive in our environment. And invasive species of plants and animals actually are having an effect on pollinators. And I put asterisks next to these top 3 issues threatening pollinators because these are all things that we can actually control in our own gardens, in our school gardens, in our home habitats. So I don't feel like they should be quite so overwhelming. These are things that you can do things about with your gardening practices. Climate change, very big issue. Disease is an issue that we're still learning a lot more about with insects, but the top 3 issues facing pollinators have solutions. And the good news is that we can do something about these things. So next slide, please. To create ideal pollinator habitat, we are advocating planting native plants. Again, they are adapted to our ecosystem. They are what the pollinators evolved with or co-evolved with. So the best The best plants for pollinators are native plants. It's not absolutely, we have plants that our pollinators gravitate towards that are ornamentals, and those are fine, but scientists have started to consider that the least amount of pollinator native plant habitat you should have to benefit our native animals is 70%. So more than 70% natives in a particular area really benefit the whole ecosystem. And when we plant native plants for pollinators, we want to consider planting things that are blooming throughout our entire growing season. So if you have plants that bloom early, April, May, here in Central Oregon, and then again, if you have a different flower that plants in the middle of the season, and finally last later in the season, growing into fall, this is ideal because we have different pollinators emerging at different times. And to that point, we want to plant a variety of colors and structures of flowers. So if you think about a hummingbird coming to visit one of your red penstemon flowers, a tubular flower, the hummingbird's tongue and beak are designed to extract the nectar out of those flowers, out of those tubular flowers, by the architecture of their tongues and their beaks. So that's an ideal plant for hummingbirds. But butterflies have a completely different way of gathering pollen and nectar. In fact, butterflies land on the surface of a flower and taste with their feet before they unroll their proboscis and extract nectar from a plant. So if you can envision an aster flower with a wide open petals and any type of composite flower, that's ideal for butterflies. Same with bees. We have bees that have some very long tongues and bees that have shorter tongues. Hoverflies that are incredible pollinators that are around all season, they have very short tongues. So they need different structures of flowers. So a variety of shapes and colors and sizes of flowers are important to keep in your native pollinator habitat. And we're also beginning to understand that for our pollinators to find this habitat, if you have 3 blanket flowers in one area of your yard, it's a lot easier for the pollinators to find them and to return to them because of the quantity and the way our pollinators find and communicate to other pollinators where these plants are that they can utilize. So planting in blocks of similar species has apparently been proven to be beneficial to our pollinators. And finally, we are, again, learning a lot more about what our pollinators need in recent years. And one of those things for butterflies happens to be something called a keystone species. A keystone species is a species that can support a wide variety of pollinators. For the example, one of the best species of trees you can plant in Central Oregon is a willow tree, preferably a native willow, to help our native pollinators. But a native willow can support more than 300 different butterflies and moths because they use the leaves of a willow tree to lay their eggs, and their caterpillars feed on those willow leaves. So there are some trees that you can plant that you might be able to find at a nursery here in town that would thrive in your landscape, but might not support a single butterfly or moth. So it's really important for us to keep in mind these keystone species. And we have a slide following this slide that has a list of keystone species, but they're very, very valuable to our native butterflies and moths in particular. Of course, you definitely want to go pesticide free in your pollinator habitat. There just aren't two ways about it. The pesticides are definitely decimating our pollinator population. So please, to the best of your ability, go pesticide free. And another way to increase the amount of pollinators in your school garden or your home garden is to create nesting habitat. And so we've provided for their food, their pollen and nectar. We're keeping their areas safe. Now they actually need a place to live, like the keystone species. We need to reconsider the way that we've been gardening for the last generation or so. We very dutifully packed up, raked, bagged, and sent our fallen leaves in autumn off to the landfill or had them removed. And they're actually an incredible resource for our overwintering pollinators. They're a resource for queen bees who will actually dig down below the surface of the soil to overwinter. And if they have an added layer of leaf litter, they are going to stay insulated and protected from the elements, from those really, really cold nights that we get here in Central Oregon. We also have, again, the butterflies and moths that are laying their eggs and raising caterpillars on those leaves. They're on those leaves when they come down, or they are disguised, they're camouflaged within that leaf litter. So leaving leaf litter, even if it's only just in one particular corner of your habitat, is really important. Gather the leaves together. You can remove them off of turf grass. You can place them, as we've talked about the soil health, you can place them over the bare soil in your garden. They make incredible compost, incredible mulch. But just leave them instead of removing them from the site, and they will support our native pollinators. Saving the stems is another important thing. Denise touched on this with the blanket flower in the garden, in the learning garden. If you leave your perennials growing over winter rather than trimming them back, in the spring, you can return to your garden and cut back your stems between 8 inches and 24 inches to support a variety of stem nesting bees. We actually have 30% of our bees nest inside the stems, especially the ones that you can sort of see a hole into. They're called pithy stems. So those in particular are really important to bees. They go down into the stem in spring, lay a series of eggs, each in a separate chamber, and then the following spring, the adult bees will emerge. So it's important to actually leave those stems for 2 seasons. And there's lots more information about that online if you want to do a little more digging. But important to remember, save the stems. And finally, another thing that that we've sort of gotten away from when we think about our gardens and what looks good is actually just leaving some bare ground, leaving some bare surface, because 70% of our bees nest in the ground, and they create these incredible underground chambers. Many of them do. And if you look very closely at the surface of south-facing soil, you might be able to see very small holes that would indicate that you have bees that are nesting. And if you watch that spot, you might be able to see them emerge or fly into their nest. All sorts of different bees use the ground as a nesting place. So having solid or bare ground, and even just observing underneath bunch grasses or near some of your perennial plants, there might be bees that are flying in and out very near and using that cover above it as sort of a hiding spot. And I've added a couple of resources on the bottom here. I have a plant list of suggested native pollinator plants for our area, and also an article from OSU, which goes really in depth about planting pollinator habitat in urban and suburban areas. And the next slide is, again, touching on the keystone species. I wanted to just put a list of these in here where you could easily access them. It's a lot of information to take in, but the numbers next to each individual species on the right-hand side is the number of butterfly and moth species that use these particular species as plants. So they're extremely important. If you really want to up your pollinator game, add some of those top keystone species to your habitat. And finally, if you participated in our Healthy Soils workshop, you were able to receive 6 different native pollinator plants, and we were able to give you 2 of each early, mid, and late season bloomers. As you can see, just looking at them, these are all different colors, different architecture, and appeal to different types of pollinators. So If you have yet to plant your plants, what you want to do is find a sunny spot. All three of these species like a sunny spot. You want to dig a hole twice as wide as the pot that you were given and a little bit deeper so that the water will infiltrate. The water will go down. Any precipitation we give will head down towards the roots. And so plant it a little lower than the soil level on the outside. And then replace that existing soil. Again, our native pollinator plants are adapted to our native soils, so they will be happy. You don't need to add any soil amendments to these particular plants. Just plant them wherever you've got sun and some access to water. At this time of year, you probably won't need to add any extra moisture because we're having lots of precipitation. So firecracker penstemon, sulfur flower buckwheat, and blanket flower, fantastic all-around workhorses for pollinators in our area. And thank you for Deschutes Soil and Water Conservation District for providing you with those plants. Finally, the amount of things that you can do with the kiddos at school and outside with the native pollinator plants is unlimited. There's all sorts of curriculum that meets your standards, but there is no end to the amount of learning that the kids can do. They absolutely love to plant these plants. They have a great time digging in the dirt, and they also enjoy putting signs up, or we've had the kids make identifiers, learn the names of the plants, and then write them down and put plant ID markers around our school. We've also created insect houses in with various different styles, and the kids have created their own town of Bugsburg at our school. So again, the sky's the limit in terms of what you can do with these kiddos and what they'll be learning about the pollinators when you're out in the habitat with them.
Thanks, Basie. That was great. Very informational.
Thank you.
If people have questions, Basie, can you give them your contact information?
Absolutely, sure. My email address is pollinatorpathwaybend@gmail.com, and I'm happy to field any questions and point you in the direction of getting a hold of native pollinator plants or getting more information, getting some curriculum. Happy to answer any of your questions.
And then you do have a Facebook group as well that I have to say has keeps it very top of mind, and also is very educational. So that's something that people can check out as well.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Basie.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And thanks for joining.
Yeah.